On page 3, it talks about the site card and what information would be included on that site card. And I want to review this briefly with you and what utilization you will make of that information on the site card. At the first information is given to you what the intended use of the site is, or in this case it says the crop to be grown. Now, sites are used for different reasons. They could be used for a cultivated field crop, they could be used for range or pasture land, or they could be used for a home site. Near the end of this exercise, we will be talking about home site evaluation, which is a different way of looking at that particular site and evaluating the criteria in terms of the usefulness of that site for a home site or building a structure on that particular location. So the crop to be grown really guides the recommendations we are making about utilization of that site. It does not necessarily affect the specific factors that we are going to evaluate about the soil or the evaluative characteristics of that soil, such as profile, depth of layers or horizons within that profile, permeability. Those types of characteristics are not going to change based upon the utilization of the site, but certainly our recommendations as to how to utilize that site and what soil or water conserving practices to employ would change based on the utilization of the site. The second item on the site card will be the soil test results in parts per million of phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, and will also give us pH. Now, you're not going to need to memorize any of this information because basically what we are doing there is looking at the levels that the site card tells us exist for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium and determining whether that is an adequate level or an inadequate level based upon information given to us in this manual. So that's basically an exercise where we look up the information and determine whether it is adequate or deficient for each of these nutrients. The pH is important. pH of the soil is basically a characteristic that will allow us to evaluate whether or not that site is suited for certain purposes. And one of the things we need to evaluate at that location based on pH is whether or not a lime requirement test would be required. Well, lime is a chemical additive that we add to a soil to raise the pH. So basically, we look at the pH as given to us on the site card and make the determination of whether or not we need to use agricultural lime to raise the pH of that soil. Item number 3 on the site card, the number of frost-free days. This comes into play primarily from a standpoint of land utilization and classifying the land. By classifying, mean determining what capability class this land would fall into based upon the number of frost-free days or growing seasons is another way of looking at that. There are specific parameters as to what land class is possible given a number of frost-free days. We will need to take that information from the site card, look at the manual, and determine whether those number of frost-free days allow this land to be in capability class 1, 2, 3, or whatever it may fall into based upon frost-free days. Average annual precipitation is very much the same. Obviously, if we're going to use this land for a cultivated agricultural site, then the amount of precipitation available would be a key factor in determining the capability class of the land. It also comes into play from a standpoint of what specific soil or water conserving practices we might recommend. So there are 2 ways in which we look at annual precipitation: usefulness of the land, types of crops that can be grown, capability class for land, and or the soil and water conserving practices that are necessary. The thickness of the original topsoil. We have no way of knowing what the original topsoil depth was at that site. It will be given to us on the site card, and the usefulness that we'll make of this is determining the amount of erosion that has occurred. That is to say that we will need to be able to measure the existing topsoil depth at that location and compare it to what the original thickness of that topsoil was. So say, for example, the original topsoil thickness was 30 inches and we today have 20 inches of topsoil based on our evaluation. We've lost 1/3 or approximately 33% of that topsoil. And we will use that as an evaluative criteria that also comes into play from a standpoint of determining the capabilities or capability class for that land. There's a statement there that says treat for most intensive use. That is put on there more than anything else for the purpose of the using this as a judging contest. It's really not going to affect our evaluation of that site very much. But I mention it because it is on the card, but it's not a criteria that we will really take into consideration. How that would actually work on treat for most intensive use, it would be, for example, maybe the intended use of the site was for a grazable pasture, but if it comes into Class 2 land, that's suitable for cultivated cropping, so we would be asked as a part of a judging contest to evaluate that site based upon the most intensive use, which is cultivated cropping more so than range or pasture. We will not be doing that in our exercises. What I mean by that is that whatever the designated use of that site is how we will evaluate the soil and water conserving practices to be used. So the treat for most intensive use will not be a factor in our evaluation of these soils and the utilization of these sites. Other factors that might be on that site card, flooding frequency, depth to a seasonable high water table, all of these are utilized to further define the capability class of the land. And as we go through each of these factors on our land evaluation card, I will point out how they would affect that capability classification. The other statement there, current use of the site may not reflect proper use and management, therefore pay no particular attention to what it's currently in. That is true. We could be on a grassland site and the designated use could be a cultivated cropland, crop to be grown wheat. We would evaluate that site based upon its capability and usefulness for the purpose of producing a field of wheat, not necessarily the pasture that it's currently in. So that statement does bear some merit in this particular case. And as we go through these example exercises that we'll do later in this unit, that'll become more obvious as to how that might come into play. Okay, so with that introduction, there are some pages in this manual. Pages 4 and 5 really talk about the setup of the competition. We were not doing this as a competition, so they don't have a lot of application to us at this time. Pages 6 and 7 also are referring to this being used as a team competition and what to do in case of ties. Here again, we're not doing this as a contest, so they do not have an application for us.